You feel overwhelmed by daily pressures that seem to multiply endlessly, and every setback shakes your confidence to its core. The stress is affecting your sleep, your health, and your happiness, while you watch others maintain their composure under similar pressures, leaving you wondering what secret they possess that you lack. I am Marcus Aurelius, who maintained inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives. Through wars, plagues, betrayals, and the crushing responsibility of absolute power, I developed the Stoic principles that gave me a fortress of calm that no external pressure could penetrate. The philosophy I'll share will transform how you respond to stress and setbacks, using the same mental discipline that sustained emperors through the darkest times. Whether you're ruling an empire or managing your career, the fundamentals of inner strength remain constant. What worked to maintain peace of mind while governing millions can work for anyone facing modern chaos. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. Might want to see how far the need for inner strength has spread. I never asked for the purple cloak. When Antoninus Pius adopted me at the age of 17, I thought I understood what it meant to serve Rome. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for the crushing weight that settled on my shoulders the day I became emperor at 40. The purple cloak itself weighs nearly 20 pounds. Layers of the finest silk, dyed with thousands of murex shells, each thread worth more than most Romans earned in a year. But the true weight was invisible, immeasurable. 65 million souls across 3 continents looked to me for protection, justice, and guidance. Every decision I made could save lives or destroy them. Every word I spoke could prevent wars or start them. In those first months, I would wake in the middle of the night, my chest tight with anxiety. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me like a physical force. I would pace the marble floors of my private chambers, feeling more like a prisoner than the most powerful man in the world. The senators expected decisive leadership. The generals demanded military strategy. The people needed bread and justice. And I felt utterly unprepared for any of it. My philosophical training had taught me about virtue and wisdom in theory, but theory crumbles quickly under the pressure of real consequences. When Germanic tribes threatened our northern borders, should I send legions that might never return home? When senators plotted against reforms that would help the poor, should I use my power to crush them or try to win them through persuasion? Every choice carried the weight of lives, and I was paralyzed by the magnitude of it all. The turning point came during a particularly difficult Senate session. A group of patricians was blocking legislation to provide grain to the poor during a harsh winter. As they spoke, I felt anger rising in my chest, consuming rage at their selfishness while people starved. My hands clenched the arms of my chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I was about to stand and use my imperial authority to silence them when something stopped me. I looked down at the purple cloak draped across my lap and realized something profound. The cloak was not the source of my power. It was merely a symbol. The real power, the only power that mattered, was the power to choose my response. I could let anger control me, or I could control my anger. I could be crushed by responsibility, or I could accept it as the price of service. In that moment, I understood that external pressures only disturb our peace when we allow them to penetrate our inner citadel. The weight of the purple cloak remained the same, but my relationship to it transformed completely. Instead of seeing it as a burden, I began to see it as a reminder, a daily practice in bearing responsibility with grace. That evening, I began what would become my lifelong practice of evening reflection. I would remove the purple cloak and sit quietly, examining the day's events not through the lens of success or failure, but through the lens of virtue. Did I act with wisdom? Did I serve justice? Did I show courage in difficult moments? Did I maintain temperance when others lost control? The cloak taught me that leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about maintaining your center while seeking the right questions. True strength comes not from external authority, but from internal discipline. The man who can rule himself can rule anything, but the man who cannot rule himself will be destroyed by any power given to him. From that day forward, when I put on the purple cloak each morning, it was no longer a weight crushing me down. It had become a teacher, reminding me that every external pressure is an opportunity to practice virtue, and every responsibility is a chance to serve something greater than myself. If you think you understand suffering, let me tell you about the plague years. When I was 8 years into my reign, a pestilence arrived from the east that would test every principle I thought I understood about maintaining inner peace. The Antonine Plague, as historians would later call it, swept across our empire like a merciless tide, killing millions and bringing civilization itself to the brink of collapse. I remember the first reports from Syriantia legions decimated not by enemy swords but by an invisible killer. Within months, it had spread to Egypt, then Greece, then into the heart of Italy itself. Rome, the eternal city, became a charnel house. The dead piled so high in the streets that we ran out of wood for funeral pyres and had to dig massed graves. Outside the city walls, my personal physician estimated that 1 in 4 people across the empire would die. I watched senators, generals, friends, and servants succumb to the same fever that showed no respect for rank or virtue. The disease was merciless: high fever, vomiting, throat ulcers, and then, for those lucky enough to survive the initial onslaught, a skin eruption that left survivors scarred and disfigured for life. But the physical suffering was only the beginning. The social fabric of Rome began to unravel. Trade collapsed as merchants refused to travel. Farmers abandoned their fields. As workers died or fled, the grain supply that fed our cities dwindled to nothing. Riots broke out as desperate people fought for dwindling resources. In some provinces, entire communities simply ceased to exist. I faced a choice that would define not just my reign, but my understanding of what it means to maintain peace in the face of absolute chaos. I could retreat to a safe villa in the countryside, surround myself with healthy people, and rule from a distance. Many advised me to do exactly that. Or I could stay in Rome, tend to my people, and risk my own life in service to the empire. I stayed, not out of bravery, but out of necessity. Military necessity, but philosophical necessity. How could I claim to understand Stoic principles if I abandoned them the moment they were truly tested? How could I speak of virtue and duty if I fled when virtue and duty demanded the most of me? Every morning during those plague years, I would don a simple cloth mask, not because I believed it would save me, but because it served as a daily reminder that I was not separate from my people's suffering. I visited hospitals where the dying lay in rows. I met with city officials to organize food distribution. I held audience with desperate families seeking news of missing loved ones. The mask became my teacher about the nature of external events. An inner peace, death, surrounded me constantly. Yet I discovered something remarkable. The closer I came to acknowledging the reality of impermanence, the more peaceful I became. When you truly accept that everything, your health, your loved ones, your empire, your own life is temporary, you stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable. During the worst months, when the death toll reached its peak, I established a daily practice that would sustain me for the rest of my life. Each evening, by the light of an oil lamp in my private chambers, I would write reflections on the day's events. Not records of meetings or military dispatches, but philosophical meditations on what the day had taught me about virtue, acceptance, and the proper response to suffering. These meditations, written on papyrus with my own hand, became my anchor in the storm. I wrote about the randomness of death and how it teaches us to value each moment. I reflected on the fragility of human plans and the importance of focusing only on what lies within our control. I examined my own reactions to crisis and worked to align them with Stoic principles rather than with fear or anger. The plague taught me that external chaos cannot disturb inner peace unless we give it permission. Yes, I grieved for the dead. Yes, I felt the weight of responsibility for those still living. But I learned to separate my emotional response to suffering from my judgment about what it meant. Suffering is a fact of existence. Our interpretation of that suffering is a choice. When the plague finally began to recede, after 5 long years, I had been transformed. The man who emerged from those dark years was no longer the anxious ruler who had once been crushed by responsibility. I had learned that peace is not the absence of chaos, it is the presence of acceptance in the midst of chaos. While the plague was devastating our cities, our enemies saw weakness and opportunity. The Germanic tribes along our northern borders, Marcomanni, Quadi, and Sarmatians, began pushing across the Danube in waves that threatened to reach Italy itself. For the first time in centuries, barbarian raiders came within striking distance of Rome. I had no choice but to leave the capital and lead our legions north to defend the empire. For 13 years, I would campaign along that frozen frontier, living in military tents and temporary forts, writing my philosophical meditations by candlelight while the sounds of warfare echoed in the distance. Those years taught me perhaps the most important lesson of my life, that external circumstances have no power over internal peace unless we grant them that power. My tent was simple canvas walls, a narrow cot, a small table for maps and correspondence. No purple hangings, no marble floors, no comfort of any kind. The Germanic winters were brutal, with temperatures that froze ink in its wells and turned breaths to ice crystals. Food was often scarce, consisting of hard bread, salted meat, and whatever game our soldiers could hunt. Sleep came in fragments between reports of enemy movements and urgent military decisions. Yet it was in this harsh environment, surrounded by the chaos of war, that I experienced some of the most profound peace of my entire life. Each evening, after reviewing battle plans and meeting with my generals, I would sit alone in my tent and write. By the flickering light of an oil lamp, I would examine the day's events through the lens of Stoic philosophy. I wrote about the nature of conflict and how it reveals character. I reflected on the temporary nature of all victories and defeats. I examined my own fears and desires, stripping away the illusions that distance us from truth. Some of my most important insights came to me in moments of extreme stress during enemy attacks. After devastating losses, while making decisions that would determine whether thousands of soldiers lived or died, the war taught me that peace is not a destination but a practice. Every day brought new challenges that tested my philosophical commitments. When I received news that enemy forces had broken through our lines and were threatening Roman settlements, I felt anger rise in my chest like fire. When trusted generals fell in battle, grief threatened to overwhelm me. When supply lines were cut and our soldiers faced starvation, fear whispered that all was lost. But each night, in the solitude of my tent, I would return to the fundamental question: what lies within my control, and what lies beyond it? I could not control enemy tactics, weather conditions, or the outcomes of battles. I could not bring back the dead or guarantee victory, but I could control my response to these challenges. I could choose to act with wisdom rather than panic, courage rather than cowardice, justice rather than expedience. The most profound moment came during the siege of a fortified Germanic settlement. Our forces had been repelled twice, with heavy casualties, and my generals were pressing me to retreat. The logical decision was to withdraw and regroup, but logic alone was not enough. I had to consider the broader implications for Roman morale, for our relationship with allied tribes, for the message it would send to other potential enemies. That night, I sat in my tent with maps spread before me, wrestling with a decision that could determine the fate of the entire campaign. As I stared at those lines and symbols representing human lives, I realized that the greatest battle was not taking place on the field outside, but within my own mind. Would I act from fear or from principle? Would I choose the safe path or the right path? I chose to continue the siege, not out of stubbornness or pride, but because careful reflection convinced me it was the right decision for the long-term security of the empire. 3 days later, the settlement fell, and the psychological impact led to a series of tribal surrenders that effectively ended the war in that region. But the external victory was less important than the internal one. In that tent, wrestling with an impossible decision, I had learned to trust the process of philosophical reflection, even in the most extreme circumstances. I had discovered that peace is not dependent on favorable outcomes, but on the knowledge that you have acted according to your highest principles. The border wars taught me that adversity is the greatest teacher. Comfort makes philosophy an academic exercise. Crisis makes it a matter of survival. When everything external is stripped away, luxury, security, certainty, you discover what remains. If you have built your peace on externals, you will be destroyed. If you have built it on virtue and right action, no external force can touch it. When I finally returned to Rome after 13 years of campaigning, I brought with me not just military victory, but something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge that peace is an internal state, independent of external circumstances. Let me tell you about the moment my life truly changed. Not when I became emperor, not during the plague, not even during the wars, but when I first understood the concept that would become the foundation of my unshakable peace, the inner citadel. I was 19 years old, studying rhetoric in Athens, when my tutor introduced me to the writings of Epictetus. This former slave had developed a philosophy so powerful that it had sustained him through the worst imaginable circumstances and created a peace so profound that even his physical bondage could not touch it. As I read his words for the first time, I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that I had found the key to a treasure I hadn't even known I was seeking. Epictetus taught that within each of us lies an impregnable fortress, a citadel of the mind that no external force can breach. This citadel is not built of stone and mortar, but of understanding, virtue, and the proper use of our faculty of choice. It is the one place in the universe that belongs completely to you, where you are absolutely sovereign, where no emperor or army or plague or death itself can enter without your permission. But understanding this, intellectually and experiencing it practically, are two entirely different things. For years, I studied Stoic texts and memorized philosophical principles, but my peace still depended on external circumstances. When things went well, I felt calm. When challenges arose, I became disturbed. I had the theory, but not the practice. The breakthrough came during my first year as emperor, when I realized that my anxiety and stress were not caused by the weight of responsibility, but by my resistance to that weight. I was fighting against circumstances instead of accepting them as the raw material for virtue. I was trying to control outcomes instead of focusing on my responses. I was building my peace on the shifting sands of externals instead of on the solid rock of inner principle. That's when I began the daily practice that would transform everything, the deliberate construction of my inner citadel. Each morning, before donning the purple cloak and facing the demands of empire, I would spend time reinforcing the walls of this mental fortress. I would remind myself of what truly lay within my control, my judgments, my choices, my responses, and what lay beyond it, everything else. The inner citadel is built on 4 unshakable foundations: The first is the discipline of perception, to see events as they actually are, not as our emotions color them. When a senator opposed my policies, I could perceive it as a personal attack which would disturb my peace, or as a difference of opinion from someone doing what he believes is right, which allows me to maintain equanimity while addressing the disagreement. The second foundation is the discipline of desire, wanting what happens rather than demanding that what we want should happen. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice. It means releasing our attachment to specific outcomes while maintaining our commitment to right action. I could desire that the plague would end immediately, but when I accepted that it would run its course according to natural law, I could focus my energy on responding wisely rather than raging against reality. The third foundation is the discipline of action, acting according to virtue regardless of external pressures or potential consequences. When Germanic tribes threatened our borders, I could act from fear, which would compromise my judgment, or from justice and courage, which would preserve my integrity regardless of the outcome. The citadel protects not just our peace, but our ability to choose the right course of action, even under extreme pressure. The fourth foundation is the practice of memento mori, the daily remembrance of mortality. When you truly accept that your life, your loved ones, your achievements, and your empire are all temporary, you stop building your peace on things that cannot last. Death becomes not an enemy to fear, but a teacher that shows you what truly matters. Within these walls, I discovered something extraordinary, a peace that does not depend on favorable circumstances, a strength that grows stronger under pressure, a joy that cannot be taken away by loss. This is not the peace of avoiding difficulty, but the peace of meeting difficulty with virtue. It is not the strength of having power over others, but the strength of having power over yourself. I practiced reinforcing this citadel every day for the rest of my life. During Senate meetings, I would remember that my peace did not depend on their approval. During military campaigns, I would remind myself that victory and defeat were both external events that could not touch my inner fortress. During personal losses, I would return to the truth that grief is natural, but despair is a choice. The most remarkable thing about the inner citadel is that the more you retreat into it, the more effective you become in the external world. When your peace no longer depends on outcomes, you can act more boldly. When your self-worth no longer depends on others' opinions, you can lead more authentically. When your happiness no longer depends on circumstances, you can face any challenge with equanimity. This citadel is not built once, but reinforced daily through practice, meditation, and the continuous choice to focus on what lies within your control. It is the one thing that no one can take from you, the one place where you are truly free, the foundation upon which all lasting peace must be built. The first time I truly understood the power of perception, I was sitting in the Senate listening to a particularly venomous speech from a senator who had opposed every reform I had proposed. His words were sharp, personal, designed to wound. I felt anger building in my chest, my hands clenching, my jaw tightening. Then I remembered something Epictetus had written: "You are not disturbed by things, but by your perception of things." In that moment, I made a choice that would transform my entire relationship with difficulty. Instead of hearing an attack, I chose to hear a man expressing his genuine beliefs. Instead of seeing an enemy, I chose to see a fellow human being doing what he thought was right for Rome. Instead of interpreting his opposition as personal hatred, I chose to see it as a difference of philosophical approach. Immediately, my anger dissolved. Not because I agreed with him, I still believed his position was wrong, but because I had stopped adding my own emotional interpretation to his words. He was simply speaking. I was choosing how to receive those words. That choice, I realized, was the key to unshakable peace. Most of our suffering comes not from events themselves but from our judgments about those events. A rainstorm is neither good nor bad, it simply is. Our interpretation that it ruins our plans makes it seem bad. A promotion is neither inherently good nor bad. Our judgment that it validates our worth makes it seem good. Strip away the interpretation, and you're left with pure fact, neutral, manageable, workable. I began practicing this discipline daily through a simple exercise I called objective observation. Whenever something disturbed my peace, I would pause and ask myself, what actually happened here, separate from my interpretation of what happened? The results were remarkable. When a messenger brought news that Germanic tribes had broken through our defenses, my first reaction was panic. But when I applied objective observation, I saw that the facts were simply, soldiers report tribal movement across the river at 3 points. The panic came from my interpretation. This means disaster, failure, catastrophe. Once I separated fact from interpretation, I could respond strategically rather than emotionally. When my adopted son Lucius Verus died suddenly during the Parthian campaign, my grief was overwhelming, but beneath the natural sadness was an added layer of judgment. This shouldn't have happened. It's unfair. The gods have abandoned us. When I separated the fact, a young man has died from my interpretation of cosmic injustice, I could honor my grief without being destroyed by it. The discipline of perception requires constant vigilance because our minds naturally add interpretation to every experience. We don't just see rain, we see bad weather. We don't just hear criticism, we hear attack. We don't just experience setbacks, we experience failure. Learning to catch these interpretations before they disturb our peace is like training a muscle. It requires daily practice and grows stronger over time. I developed several techniques that became part of my daily practice. The first was the practice of bare attention, describing events in the simplest possible terms, without emotional coloring. Instead of that treacherous senator betrayed my trust, I would say, Senator Marcus voted against the proposal. Instead of this terrible plague is destroying everything, I would say, many people are becoming ill. The second technique was perspective shifting, deliberately viewing the same event from multiple angles. When supply problems delayed our military campaign, I could see it as incompetent logistics ruining our strategy, or as an opportunity to improve our planning processes, or as a chance to practice patience under pressure. Each perspective was equally valid. Choosing the most constructive one was an act of wisdom. The third technique was temporal distancing, asking how this event would appear from the perspective of months or years in the future. The urgent crisis that seems catastrophic today often becomes merely a minor bump when viewed from the distance of time. This doesn't minimize genuine problems, but prevents us from being overwhelmed by temporary difficulties. Perhaps the most powerful technique was learning to separate the person from their actions. When someone opposed me, I trained myself to see not an enemy but a person acting according to their understanding. When someone praised me, I saw not validation but a person expressing their current opinion. This prevented both anger at criticism and attachment to approval. The discipline of perception taught me that we live in two worlds simultaneously, the world of facts and the world of interpretations. The world of facts is usually manageable. The world of interpretations is where we create our own suffering. When you learn to distinguish between these two worlds, you gain the power to choose which one you inhabit. The deepest source of all human disturbance lies in the gap between what we want and what we get. I learned this truth during one of the most painful periods of my reign, when I desperately wanted my son Commodus to embrace philosophy and virtue, but he showed interest only in gladiatorial combat and personal pleasure. Every father wants his son to surpass him, but as emperor, my desire carried the weight of an entire empire. I arranged the finest tutors, exposed him to the greatest minds of our age, included him in important decisions, hoping to kindle some spark of wisdom or duty. Yet the more I pushed toward virtue, the more he seemed to gravitate toward vice. My attachment to this outcome created constant anguish. That's when I discovered the profound teaching that would revolutionize my understanding of peace, the discipline of desire. Epictetus had taught that we suffer not because we don't get what we want, but because we want what we cannot guarantee. The solution is not to stop caring, but to redirect our wanting toward what actually lies within our power. I realized I was trying to control Commodus's character, which belonged entirely to him. I could control what education I provided, what examples I set, what opportunities I offered, but his response to these things was his choice, not mine. When I shifted my desire from I want Commodus to become virtuous to I want to provide the best guidance I can and accept whatever he chooses to do with it, my suffering ended. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. I continued, working with him, setting boundaries, offering guidance, but I released my attachment to the outcome. I wanted what was happening, son making his own choices, rather than demanding that what I wanted should happen, our son conforming to my vision. The discipline of desire operates on a simple but revolutionary principle. Peace comes from wanting what occurs, not from getting what we want. This is not resignation or fatalism. It's the recognition that the universe operates according to its own laws, and our peace depends on aligning ourselves with those laws rather than fighting against them. I began practicing this discipline in every area of my life. When senators opposed legislation I believed was crucial, instead of wanting them to agree with me, which I couldn't control, I wanted the opportunity to persuade them through reason, which I could control. When Germanic tribes attacked our borders, instead of wanting them to leave us alone, which lay beyond my power, I wanted the chance to defend our people with courage and wisdom, which lay within my power. The most profound application came during the final years of the plague. I desperately wanted it to end, wanted my people to stop suffering, wanted to restore the empire to its former prosperity. This wanting created constant torment because the plague followed natural laws, not imperial wishes. When I shifted to wanting the opportunity to serve my people during their time of need, my anguish transformed into purposeful action. I developed a daily practice I called desire alignment. Each morning, I would examine my wants and ask, does this desire depend on things within my control or beyond it? If beyond my control, I would rephrase it to focus on my response rather than the external outcome. Instead of, I want this military campaign to succeed, I would say, I want to lead this campaign with wisdom and courage. Instead of, I want this senator to support my proposal, I would say, I want to present my case with clarity and integrity. Instead of, I want this illness to heal quickly, I would say, I want to bear this discomfort with dignity and patience. This practice revealed something remarkable. When you stop demanding specific outcomes from the universe, you become far more effective at influencing those outcomes. When your peace doesn't depend on success, you can take greater risks. When your satisfaction doesn't depend on others' approval, you can act more authentically. When your happiness doesn't depend on circumstances, you can face any situation with equanimity. The discipline of desire also taught me the difference between preferences and attachments. I could prefer that the empire remain peaceful, that my health stay strong, that my friends lived long lives. These preferences were natural and didn't disturb my peace. But when preferences became attachments, when I demanded that things be other than they were, suffering inevitably followed. The most liberating discovery was that releasing attachment to outcomes actually increased my power to influence them. When I stopped needing the Senate's approval, I could speak more boldly. When I stopped fearing military defeat, I could make better strategic decisions. When I stopped demanding that life be easy, I found strength I never knew I possessed. Perhaps the greatest test of this discipline came when facing my own mortality. Like all humans, I naturally wanted to live as long as possible, but I learned to transform this attachment into acceptance. I want to use whatever time I'm given as wisely as possible. This shift from demanding longevity to embracing purpose filled my remaining years with peace rather than anxiety. The discipline of desire is not about wanting less. It's about wanting differently. It's the art of directing your desires toward what you can actually control: your thoughts, choices, actions, and responses, while releasing your grip on everything else. When you master this discipline, you discover that you already have everything you need for complete peace. True peace is not found in contemplation alone, but in the harmony between your principles and your actions. I learned this during one of the most difficult decisions of my reign, when I had to choose between personal mercy and public justice, choice that would test every philosophical principle I held dear. A trusted general, Avidius Cassius, had rebelled against me while I was campaigning on the northern frontier. False reports of my death had reached the eastern provinces, and believing the empire needed strong leadership, he had declared himself emperor. When the truth emerged and his rebellion crumbled, he was killed by his own soldiers. His family, his wife and children were brought to me as prisoners, their fate in my hands. Every emotion in me wanted revenge. This man had betrayed not just me personally, but the stability of the entire empire. His rebellion could have triggered civil war, costing thousands of lives. Justice seemed to demand the harshest punishment for his family as a warning to future rebels. But my philosophical principles demanded something different. The four cardinal virtues, justice, courage, and temperance, must guide every action, especially when emotions pull us in other directions. Wisdom told me to consider the long-term consequences, not just the immediate satisfaction of revenge. Justice required punishment proportional to actual guilt, not collective punishment for one man's choices. Courage meant doing what was right despite criticism from those who wanted blood. Temperance demanded restraint even when power gave me unlimited options. I chose to spare Cassius's family completely. More than that, I maintained their honors, protected their property, and treated them with the same respect due to any Roman citizens. Many in the Senate were outraged, calling it weakness. Some generals questioned whether I was too soft to rule effectively, but I had acted according to virtue, and that alignment between principle and action created a peace no external criticism could disturb. This experience taught me the discipline of action, the practice of making every decision based on virtue, rather than emotion, convenience, or external pressure. When your actions flow from your deepest principles, you create an inner harmony that no external chaos can break. The discipline begins with clarity about your core values. For me, the four Stoic virtues provided an unshakable foundation. Before any major decision, I would ask, does this action increase wisdom or ignorance? Does it serve justice or injustice? Does it require courage or enable cowardice? Does it demonstrate temperance or indulgence? If an action aligned with virtue, I pursued it regardless of personal cost. If it conflicted with virtue, I rejected it regardless of personal benefit. This framework guided me through countless difficult decisions. When corrupt officials offered bribes in exchange for favorable treatment, justice demanded their prosecution even though it created powerful enemies. When popular policies conflicted with long-term welfare, wisdom required choosing the harder path, despite public disapproval. When fear whispered that military risks were too great, courage demanded facing those risks to protect Roman citizens. The most challenging aspect of this discipline is acting virtuously when virtue seems disadvantageous. During negotiations with Germanic tribes, honesty would have revealed tactical weaknesses, but I chose transparency over deception because justice required it. When advisors suggested harsh taxation to fund military campaigns, temperance demanded finding alternatives, even though the easy path would have solved immediate problems. I discovered that virtue-based action creates a unique form of peace, not the peace of favorable outcomes, but the peace of integrity. When you know your actions align with your deepest principles, you can accept any consequences without regret. External results become secondary to internal harmony. This doesn't mean ignoring practical considerations or acting recklessly in the name of principle. Wisdom itself is a virtue, requiring careful thought about how to apply other virtues effectively. Sometimes courage requires patience rather than immediate action. Sometimes justice requires mercy rather than punishment. The discipline lies in ensuring that practical decisions serve virtue rather than virtue serving practical concerns. I developed several practices to strengthen this discipline. Each evening, I would review the day's decisions and examine whether they had been driven by virtue or by emotion, convenience, or external pressure. When I found actions that fell short of my principles, I would plan how to do better the next day, rather than dwelling on the failure. I also practiced virtue visualization, imagining challenging scenarios and mentally rehearsing how I would respond according to my principles. This preparation made it easier to act virtuously when real challenges arose, because I had already worked through the decision-making process in advance. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to measure success by the quality of my actions rather than their outcomes. A decision based on wisdom and justice was successful regardless of whether it produced the desired results. A decision based on fear or greed was a failure, even if it led to temporary advantages. The discipline of action taught me that peace is not a feeling, but a way of being. When your external actions align with your internal principles, you create a harmony that resonates through every aspect of your life. You may not control outcomes, but you control the integrity of your choices. You may not control others' responses, but you control the virtue of your actions. This alignment between principle and practice becomes its own reward. The peace that comes from knowing you have acted rightly is deeper and more lasting than any peace dependent on favorable circumstances. It is the peace of the person who can face any consequence with dignity, because they know their actions were worthy of respect. Each morning when I awoke as emperor, the first thing I saw was a small hourglass on the table beside my bed. The sand inside would complete its journey from top to bottom in exactly 1 hour, a daily reminder that my time, like all time, was finite and precious. This simple practice of memento mori, remembering death, became one of the most powerful tools for maintaining unshakable peace. Most people avoid thinking about death because they believe it will make them morbid or fearful. I discovered the opposite. Daily contemplation of mortality brings clarity, purpose, and a profound peace that comes from accepting the fundamental truth of human existence. When you truly internalize that nothing lasts forever, you stop wasting energy on things that don't matter and pour your full attention into what does. The practice began during my philosophical studies, but it deepened dramatically during the plague years when death surrounded me constantly. I watched senators, generals, friends, servants, and citizens succumb to the same fate that awaits us all. Instead of turning away from this reality, I chose to study it, to learn from it, to let it teach me how to live. I started each day by spending a few minutes contemplating my own mortality, not morbidly, but practically. I would remind myself, this could be my last day. If I knew for certain that the sun would not rise tomorrow, how would I spend these precious hours? This wasn't meant to create anxiety, but to bring focus. When you're aware that time is limited, you naturally prioritize what truly matters. The hourglass taught me that life itself is neither long nor short, it simply is. What matters is not the quantity of time, but the quality of attention we bring to each moment. A day lived with full awareness and virtue is worth more than years spent in distraction or vice. A decision made with careful thought and good intention matters more than 1,000 hasty choices, driven by convenience. This daily practice transformed my relationship with every challenge I faced as emperor. When senators opposed my legislation, I could become angry about the delay, or I could remember that their opposition, my frustration, and even the legislation itself were all temporary. What mattered was how I responded in this moment, with this limited time, according to my principles. When military campaigns stretched on for years, I could despair about the time being wasted, or I could remember that these very years, with their hardships and responsibilities, were my life. They weren't obstacles preventing me from living. They were life itself. The choice was whether to live them with virtue and presence, or to waste them wishing for different circumstances. The practice of memento mori also freed me from many of the petty concerns that disturb most people's peace. When you truly accept that your wealth, status, achievements, and even your empire are temporary, you stop building your identity on things that cannot last. This doesn't mean becoming careless about these things, but it means holding them lightly, using them wisely, and never letting them define your worth. I developed several specific techniques for deepening this practice. Each evening, I would reflect on the day as if it had been my last, asking, if this were my final day on earth, would I be satisfied with how I spent it? Did I act with virtue? Did I serve something greater than myself? Did I love the people dear to me? Did I face my responsibilities with courage? I also practiced what I called legacy meditation, imagining myself on my deathbed, looking back over my entire life and asking what would matter most in that final moment. Would I be proud of my character? Would I feel peace about the choices I had made? Would I have any regrets about opportunities for virtue that I had missed? Another powerful technique was disappearance visualization, imagining that someone or something important to me had vanished forever, then returning to the present moment with renewed appreciation. When I felt frustrated with a difficult senator, I would imagine him gone forever and feel gratitude for the opportunity to practice patience. When I felt burdened by imperial duties, I would imagine my reign ended and feel thankful for the chance to serve. Perhaps the most profound insight from Memento Mori was understanding that death is not the opposite of life, but its completion. Every moment we're alive, we're also dying, not in a morbid sense, but in the natural sense that everything that has a beginning has an ending. Accepting this truth completely removes the sting of mortality and allows us to embrace each day as the gift it truly is. The practice taught me that fear of death is really fear of not having lived fully. When you live each day with virtue, purpose, and presence, death loses its terror because you know you haven't wasted the time you were given. You may want more time, that's natural, but you don't need more time to live a complete life. Memento Mori became my gateway to a peculiar form of freedom. When you're not afraid of dying, you're not afraid of living boldly. When you accept that everything is temporary, you're not attached to maintaining things as they are. When you know that this moment is all you truly have, you bring your full attention to making it worthy. The hourglass reminded me daily that time is not something I have, but something I am. Each grain of sand represents not just a moment passing, but a moment lived. The question is not how many grains remain, but whether I'm using the current grain with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. One of the most counterintuitive practices that strengthened my inner peace was deliberately imagining loss, setback, and misfortune. This technique, which I practiced using a polished bronze mirror as a focal point for meditation, taught me that we can build resilience by mentally rehearsing difficulties before they occur. I discovered this practice during my early years as emperor when I was constantly anxious about potential disasters. What if Germanic tribes invaded Italy? What if the grain supply failed? What if key generals rebelled? What if the plague returned? These fears created constant background anxiety that robbed me of peace even during good times. Then I read something profound in Seneca's letters. Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared? He was describing the practice of negative visualization, deliberately experiencing or imagining hardship to build appreciation and resilience. I began practicing this systematically. Each morning, after my memento mori reflection, I would spend time imagining various forms of loss or difficulty. I would picture the empire in ruins, myself stripped of power, my loved ones dead, my health failed, my achievements forgotten. This wasn't masochistic self-torture, but practical preparation for the realities of human existence. The results amazed me. Instead of increasing my anxiety, these visualizations reduced it dramatically. When you've mentally rehearsed losing everything, you value two powerful things happen. First, you develop genuine appreciation for what you currently have. Second, you build confidence that you could survive and even thrive if loss actually occurred. I remember one particular morning when I spent time imagining the complete destruction of Rome barbarians sacking the city, the Senate dissolved, the legions scattered, the empire itself merely a memory. Then I opened my eyes and looked out at the thriving city below my palace. The contrast filled me with profound gratitude for the present reality and with confidence that I could bear whatever challenges might come. The practice became especially valuable during the border wars. Before each campaign, I would visualize defeat, our armies routed, myself captured or killed, the barbarians advancing toward Rome unchecked. This mental rehearsal helped me prepare better strategies, consider contingency plans, and maintain equanimity during actual battles. When real setbacks occurred, they felt familiar rather than catastrophic because I had already experienced them mentally. I applied negative visualization to personal relationships as well. I would imagine the death of close advisors, the betrayal of trusted friends, the rebellion of family members. This wasn't cynical preparation for disappointment, but practical training in appreciation and resilience. When Lucius Verus died unexpectedly, my grief was real but manageable because I had already contemplated such loss. When Avidius Cassius rebelled, my disappointment was genuine but not devastating because I had imagined such betrayal. The technique works because it addresses to fundamental sources of human suffering, taking good things for granted and being unprepared for inevitable change. When you regularly imagine losing your health, you appreciate feeling strong. When you visualize losing your wealth, you're grateful for what you have. When you contemplate losing loved ones, you cherish the time you currently share. More importantly, negative visualization builds what I came to think of as resilience reserves, mental and emotional strength that you can draw upon when real difficulties arise. Just as physical exercise prepares your body for physical challenges, mental exercise prepares your mind for emotional and practical challenges. I developed several specific techniques for this practice. Total loss visualization involved imagining the complete destruction of everything I value, empire, family, health, reputation, then asking myself how I would maintain virtue and meaning even in such circumstances. This exercise taught me that my essential worth was independent of externals. Gradual loss visualization involved imagining the slow deterioration of good things, my health gradually failing, my authority slowly diminishing, my relationships naturally changing over time. This helped me appreciate the temporary nature of all conditions and reduced my anxiety about inevitable changes. Random setback visualization involved imagining unexpected difficulties that could occur on any given day: natural disasters, sudden illness, betrayal by trusted associates, military defeats. This mental preparation made me more adaptable and less reactive when surprises actually occurred. Perhaps the most powerful variation was virtue under pressure visualization, imagining myself facing extreme challenges. While maintaining my philosophical principles, I would picture scenarios where maintaining virtue would be difficult and costly, then mentally rehearse choosing principle over convenience. This prepared me for real-world situations where doing the right thing required sacrifice. The practice taught me that most of our suffering comes not from external events, but from the gap between our expectations and reality. When you expect only good things to continue indefinitely, any setback feels catastrophic. When you've mentally prepared for the full range of human experience, you can meet both fortune and misfortune with equanimity. Negative visualization also revealed the absurdity of many common worries. When you imagine complete disaster, you realize that most daily concerns are relatively minor. The fear of criticism seems less important when you've contemplated exile. The worry about looking foolish seems trivial when you've imagined total humiliation. This practice didn't make me pessimistic or fatalistic. Instead, it made me more grateful, more resilient, and more present. When you've spent time imagining loss, the current moment feels like a gift rather than an entitlement. When you've mentally rehearsed hardship, you face real challenges with confidence rather than panic. On my desk in the palace, I kept a simple sundial that marked only the present moment, no past hours, no future times, just the shadow falling across the word, now carved into its bronze surface. This constant reminder taught me perhaps the most liberating truth of my entire philosophical journey. Peace exists only in the present moment, and the present moment is the only time we can actually influence. Most human suffering occurs in two places that don't actually exist: the past and the future. We torment ourselves with regret about decisions we cannot change, and anxiety about events we cannot predict. Meanwhile, the only moment where we have any real power, this moment, right now, slips by unnoticed while we're lost in mental time travel. I learned this lesson powerfully during the darkest period of the plague, when reports of death and destruction arrived daily from across the empire. Each morning brought news of cities overwhelmed, legions decimated, entire provinces in chaos. My mind would race between guilt about past decisions that might have prevented the catastrophe and fear about future scenarios that could destroy everything I had worked to build. One particular morning, after receiving especially devastating reports from Egypt, I found myself paralyzed by the magnitude of the crisis. The past seemed filled with missed opportunities to prepare better. The future appeared hopeless, with the plague potentially consuming the entire civilized world. I sat in my study, overwhelmed by the weight of what had been and what might be, unable to act effectively in the present. That's when my attention fell on the sundial. The shadow pointed directly at now, indifferent to my mental anguish about yesterday or tomorrow. In that moment, I realized I was wasting the only time I actually possessed, the present, by dwelling on times I could not influence. I made a decision that transformed my entire approach to leadership and life. I would focus completely on what I could do right now, in this moment, with the information and resources currently available. I stopped trying to solve the entire plague crisis and instead asked, what is the most useful action I can take in the next hour? The answer was simple: review the morning's reports, make decisions about resource allocation, and send clear instructions to provincial governors. When that hour ended, I asked the same question again and again. Instead of being paralyzed by the enormity of the overall situation, I found peace and effectiveness by breaking it down into manageable present moments. This Practice revealed something profound. The present moment is infinitely deep, but manageable in scope. You cannot solve every problem, but you can address the problem in front of you right now. You cannot control your entire future, but you can choose your response in this moment. You cannot undo past mistakes, but you can act wisely now. I developed several techniques for anchoring myself in the present. The first was breath awareness. When my mind began racing toward past regrets or future anxieties, I would focus on the simple act of breathing. Each inhale and exhale happens only in the present moment and serves as a natural anchor to now. The second technique was sensory grounding, deliberately noticing what I could see, hear, feel, smell, and taste right now. During stressful Senate meetings, I would ground myself by feeling the marble beneath my feet, hearing the sound of voices, seeing the light streaming through the windows. These sensory experiences exist only in the present and immediately bring awareness back to now. The third technique was action focus. Instead of thinking about all the things I needed to do, I would identify the single most important action I could take in the current moment and give it my complete attention. This prevented my mind from scattering across multiple time frames and multiple concerns. Perhaps the most powerful technique was present scanning, regularly asking myself, where is my mind right now? If I found my attention had drifted to past events or future worries, I would gently return it to the present without judgment. This became as natural as breathing and created a consistent foundation of peace. Throughout even the most challenging days, the practice taught me that most of our problems exist only in our thoughts about time, not in actual time. The defeat that happened last month exists now only as a memory. The threat that might occur next year exists now only as a possibility. The only real problem is the one you face right now, and present problems are almost always more manageable than our thoughts about past or future problems. Living in the present doesn't mean ignoring the lessons of the past or failing to plan for the future. It means learning from the past now, planning for the future now, but doing both with your attention firmly anchored in the current moment. When you study history, you do it presently. When you make plans, you make them presently. The activity happens now, only the content relates to other times. This understanding transformed my experience of even routine imperial duties. Instead of rushing through daily tasks while thinking about the next meeting or the previous disappointment, I learned to be fully present to whatever I was doing. Reviewing reports became an opportunity for careful attention rather than a chore to endure. Meeting with advisors became a chance for genuine connection rather than an obligation to complete. The present moment also revealed itself as the only place where joy and peace actually exist. Happiness about past successes is just a memory of happiness. Hope for future contentment is just a thought about happiness. Real happiness, the kind that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances, exists only when you're fully present to life as it unfolds right now. The sundial taught me that time is not something we have, but something we are. The present moment is not a brief pause between past and future, but the eternal now where all life actually occurs. When you learn to live here, in this moment, you discover that peace was never somewhere else, which was always right here, waiting for your attention. The most challenging test of inner peace comes not from natural disasters or military defeats, but from dealing with difficult people. I learned this truth through years of managing senators who opposed every reform, generals who questioned every strategy, and courtiers who seemed to thrive on creating drama and conflict. The breakthrough in my understanding came during a particularly frustrating encounter with Senator Gaius Bruttius, a man who seemed to disagree with me not based on principle but purely from spite. He had opposed my judicial reforms, blocked my attempts to help the poor, and consistently undermined imperial policy in Senate debates. My initial reaction was anger and personal offense. How dare he obstruct measures that would benefit the empire? Then I remembered something Epictetus had taught. When someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. I realized that my disturbance came not from Brutius's actions, but from my expectation that he should behave differently. I was trying to control his responses instead of focusing on my own. That evening, I took out my diplomatic seal and practiced what would become one of my most valuable techniques. Instead of seeing Brutus as an enemy, I tried to understand him as a fellow human being responding to his own internal pressures. What fears might drive his opposition? What experiences had shaped his worldview? What values, however misguided, was he trying to protect? This shift in perspective was transformative. When I stopped taking his opposition personally and started seeing it as his natural response to circumstances he didn't fully control, my anger dissolved. I could disagree with his positions while maintaining respect for his humanity. I could oppose his policies while understanding his motivations. This understanding led me to develop what I called the internal weather principle. Difficult people are like storms. They arise from conditions beyond their immediate control and eventually pass. A storm is not personal. It's simply the result of atmospheric pressures meeting and creating turbulence. Similarly, a person's difficult behavior usually reflects their internal pressures, past wounds, and current fears rather than any rational assessment of you. I began applying this principle systematically. When a general criticized my military strategy, instead of hearing an attack on my competence, I heard a man worried about his soldiers' lives expressing his concerns through the only channel available to him. When courtiers spread rumors about my policies, instead of seeing malicious enemies, I saw people afraid of change, trying to maintain some sense of control in an uncertain world. The most profound application came with my relationship with my son Commodus. As he grew older, his behavior became increasingly erratic and concerning. He showed little interest in philosophy, seemed drawn to violence and spectacle, and displayed none of the virtues I had hoped to instill. My initial response was disappointment and frustration. How could my own son be so different from what I expected? But applying the principles of dealing with difficult people to my own family revealed something important. Commodus was not behaving badly to hurt me. He was responding to his own nature, his own fears, his own understanding of the world. My job was not to control his choices, but to continue offering guidance while accepting that his responses belonged entirely to him. I developed several practical techniques for maintaining peace when dealing with challenging personalities. The first was sympathetic interpretation, always choosing the most charitable explanation for someone's behavior. When a senator attacked my proposal, I could assume he was driven by spite, which would disturb my peace, or assume he was genuinely concerned about unintended consequences, which allowed me to respond constructively. The second technique was virtue focus. Instead of trying to change the other person's behavior, I focused on demonstrating virtue in my response. Could I show patience with impatience? Could I respond to anger with calm? Could I meet ignorance with wisdom? This shift from trying to control others to controlling myself created immediate peace. The third technique was boundary setting without attachment, establishing clear limits on acceptable behavior while releasing attachment to whether those boundaries would be respected. I could tell a difficult advisor that certain conduct was unacceptable while accepting that he might choose to continue anyway, which would simply result in natural consequences. Perhaps the most powerful technique was dignified disengagement, recognizing when continued interaction with someone was unproductive and withdrawing gracefully without anger or resentment. Some people, for whatever reason, cannot engage constructively. Accepting this reality and limiting exposure while maintaining civility protects your peace without creating unnecessary conflict. The practice taught me that we cannot control other people's behavior, but we can control our interpretation of that behavior and our response to it. When someone acts difficult, we have a choice. We can see an enemy trying to harm us, which creates disturbance, or a fellow human being struggling with their own limitations, which creates compassion. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or failing to establish boundaries. It means responding to difficult behavior from a place of strength and wisdom rather than from reactive emotion. When your peace no longer depends on others behaving well, you can address problems more effectively because you're not emotionally invested in the outcome. I learned that the people who disturb us most often have the most to teach us about virtue. Patient people don't test your patience. Impatient people do. Honest people don't challenge your integrity. Dishonest people do. Wise people don't require you to practice tolerance. Foolish people do. In this way, difficult people become unwitting teachers, providing opportunities to strengthen exactly the virtues they seem to attack. There is a profound difference between acceptance and resignation, though most people confuse the two. I learned this distinction through one of the most painful experiences of my reign, watching my son Commodus develop into everything I had hoped he would not become, while maintaining my love for him and my peace with his choices. Resignation says, I give up. Nothing matters. There's no point in trying. Acceptance says, I acknowledge reality as it is, while continuing to act according to virtue. Resignation is passive defeat. Acceptance is active wisdom. The difference transformed my understanding of what it means to find peace in an imperfect world. I kept a smooth riverstone on my desk, worn by countless years of flowing water, as a reminder of acceptance's power. The stone didn't resist the water or fight against the current. It allowed the water to flow over it, around it, through its journey, and in doing so, it was shaped into something beautiful. Resistance would have created turbulence and eventual destruction. Acceptance created transformation, and peace stopped my struggle. With Commodus illustrated this principle perfectly. As he grew into adulthood, it became clear that he possessed neither the temperament nor the interest for philosophical rule. He was drawn to gladiatorial games, luxury, and the exercise of power for its own sake. Every conversation about virtue seemed to push him further toward vice. Every attempt to guide him toward wisdom seemed to increase his resentment. I faced a choice that every parent eventually confronts. I could continue fighting against his nature, trying to force him into the mold I thought he should fill, or I could accept who he was while continuing to offer guidance without attachment to the outcome. The first path led to constant conflict and mutual frustration. The second led to a form of peace that didn't depend on his changing. Acceptance began with understanding the difference between what I could and could not control. I could control what education I provided, what examples I set, what opportunities I offered, and what boundaries I established. I could not control how he received this guidance, what choices he made with his freedom, or what kind of person he decided to become. This distinction is crucial because most of our suffering comes from trying to control things that lie beyond our power, while neglecting things that lie within it. We exhaust ourselves trying to change other people while failing to work on our own character. We rage against circumstances we cannot alter while missing opportunities to shape our responses. True acceptance requires a kind of active letting go, not the passivity of giving up, but the wisdom of redirecting energy toward what you can actually influence. When I accepted that Commodus would make his own choices, I could focus on being the best father and emperor I could be rather than trying to be the father and emperor he needed me to be for him to change. The practice of acceptance transformed my relationship with every challenge I faced as emperor. During the plague years, I could rail against the disease and waste energy on anger about its unfairness, or I could accept its reality and focus on responding wisely to protect and serve my people. During the border wars, I could become frustrated with the necessity of violence, or I could accept that defending Rome required military action while ensuring that such action was guided by justice and proportionality. I developed what I called radical responsibility, taking complete responsibility for my response to situations while releasing all expectation that situations should be other than they are. This meant accepting the reality of Germanic tribes threatening our borders while taking full responsibility for defending against them. It meant accepting the reality of corruption in some officials while taking full responsibility for creating systems that minimized such corruption. Acceptance also taught me to work with the grain of reality rather than against it. A skilled carpenter studies the wood's natural grain and cuts with it rather than against it, creating beauty by cooperating with the material's inherent properties. Similarly, wise action often means understanding the natural flow of events and working with them rather than demanding that they conform to our preferences. This doesn't mean abandoning all effort to improve situations. It means understanding that the most effective action often comes from accepting current reality as the starting point for change, rather than the obstacle to change. You cannot solve a problem by denying its existence or wishing it were different. You can only solve it by understanding exactly what it is and working skillfully with those conditions. Perhaps the most profound aspect of acceptance was discovering that it actually increases your power to influence outcomes. When you stop wasting energy fighting against unchangeable realities, you have more energy available for shaping changeable realities. When you accept people as they are, you can work more effectively with their actual motivations rather than the motivations you wish they had. Acceptance taught me that peace is not about getting what you want, but about wanting what you get, not in a passive way, but in an active way that recognizes that what you get is the raw material for virtue. The difficult senator is an opportunity to practice patience. The military crisis is a chance to demonstrate courage. The personal loss is an invitation to deepen compassion. The river stone reminded me daily that the most powerful force in nature, water, achieves its effects not through resistance, but through persistent, patient acceptance of each obstacle. As it encounters it, water doesn't fight the rock. It flows around it, over it, through it, and eventually shapes it. This is the paradox of acceptance. By stop fighting reality, you gain the power to influence it. I learned that acceptance is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. Each morning brought new challenges that tested my commitment to working with reality rather than against it. Each evening brought opportunities to reflect on where I had resisted unnecessarily and where I could flow more skillfully the next day. The virtue of acceptance revealed that true strength lies not in the ability to force circumstances to conform to your will, but in the ability to maintain your virtue regardless of what circumstances arise. This is the foundation of unshakable peace, knowing that no external event can disturb your commitment to wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Philosophy without practice is merely intellectual entertainment. The transformation of my inner life from anxiety to peace happened not through grand revelations, but through small, consistent daily habits that gradually reshaped my entire way of being. The simple ceramic bowl I used for morning ablutions became a symbol of how ordinary routines could become extraordinary opportunities for wisdom. My daily practice began before dawn, in the quiet hours when the palace was still and I could attend to my inner life before the demands of empire required my attention. I would wake naturally, without servants or alarms, and spend the first moments of consciousness not planning the day ahead, but simply being present to the gift of awakening. The morning ritual started with the ceremonial washing, using the same simple bowl that reminded me of the equality of all humans before the basic needs of life. As I washed my face and hands, I would practice gratitude for the night's rest, for the clean water, for the health that allowed me to serve another day. This wasn't mere routine, but mindful attention to the present moment and appreciation for ordinary blessings. After washing, I would spend time with my journal, writing 3 specific types of reflections. First, I would set my intention for the day by identifying the virtues I wanted to practice and the character qualities I wanted to strengthen. Second, I would mentally rehearse challenging situations I might face and visualize, responding to them with wisdom rather than reaction. Third, I would remind myself of key Stoic principles that would guide my decisions. The morning meditation lasted exactly 1 hour, timed by the same hourglass that sat beside my bed. During this time, I would practice the discipline of perception, examining my thoughts and judgments to ensure they were based on reality rather than emotional interpretation. I would practice the discipline of desire, aligning my wants with what lay within my control. I would practice the discipline of action, committing to virtue regardless of external pressures. Throughout the day, I maintained smaller practices that reinforced these morning insights. Before each meeting, I would take 3 conscious breaths and remind myself of my intention to listen carefully and respond wisely. Before making any important decision, I would pause and ask, what would virtue require in this situation? Before reacting to any challenging news, I would separate the facts from my interpretation of those facts. The evening practice was equally important and followed a consistent structure. After completing my daily duties, I would return to my private chambers and conduct what I called an examination of conscience, not in a spirit of harsh self-judgment, but in the spirit of a philosopher studying his own character development. I would review the day's events and ask specific questions. Where did I act according to virtue, and where did I fall short? When did I maintain my peace, and when did I allow external events to disturb me? What did I learn about myself, about others, about the nature of reality? How could I apply this learning to become wiser tomorrow? This evening reflection was always written in my journal, creating a record of insights and a track of progress over time. Writing forced me to think clearly about my experiences, rather than simply having vague feelings about them. The act of putting thoughts into words revealed patterns I might otherwise have missed and helped consolidate the day's learning. Perhaps the most important aspect of my daily practice was consistency rather than perfection. I didn't expect to master every principle immediately or to maintain perfect equanimity in every situation. What mattered was showing up every day, doing the work, and gradually building the habits that would support inner peace over the long term. I discovered that small, consistent actions compound dramatically over time. Spending a few minutes each morning setting virtuous intentions might seem insignificant, but over months and years, this practice fundamentally rewired my automatic responses to stress and challenge. Taking 3 conscious breaths before each meeting might appear trivial, but it created space between stimulus and response that allowed wisdom to emerge. The daily practices also created what I called virtue momentum. Each small act of philosophical discipline made the next act easier. Beginning the day with gratitude made it easier to maintain appreciation during difficult moments. Starting with clear intentions made it easier to act according to principle when pressures mounted. Ending with honest reflection made it easier to learn from mistakes rather than simply regret them. I adapted the practices to fit different circumstances. During military campaigns, the morning meditation might happen in a tent by candlelight, rather than in the palace at dawn, but the essential elements remained the same. During particularly busy periods, the practices might be shortened but never abandoned entirely. The consistency of the framework provided stability even when external circumstances were chaotic. The practices evolved over time as my understanding deepened. Early in my reign, the morning reflection focused heavily on preparing for specific challenges. Later, it became more about cultivating general qualities of character. The evening examination initially concentrated on correcting mistakes. Eventually, it emphasized integrating insights and planning improvements. What surprised me was how much I began to look forward to these quiet times of reflection and renewal. What had started as philosophical discipline became a source of genuine pleasure and peace. The morning meditation became my favorite part of the day, a time of connection with my deepest values and clearest thinking. The evening reflection became a satisfying conclusion that brought closure and learning to each day's experiences. The daily practices taught me that transformation happens not through dramatic changes, but through consistent, small improvements. You don't become wise in a day, but you can make one wise choice today. You don't achieve perfect peace immediately, but you can find peace in this moment. You don't eliminate all character flaws at once, but you can work on one flaw today. The ceramic bowl reminded me that extraordinary results come from treating ordinary activities with extraordinary attention. Every routine can become a spiritual practice. Every habit can become an opportunity for growth. Every day can become a step toward the person you want to become. In the busiest palace in the world, surrounded constantly by advisors, petitioners, guards, and servants, I discovered that true peace required learning to be alone, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. The simple oil lamp that provided light for my solitary contemplations became my teacher about the profound difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of being alone. Solitude is the glory of being alone. Loneliness comes from depending on others for your sense of completeness. Solitude comes from finding that completeness within yourself. Loneliness is about what you lack when others are absent. Solitude is about what you discover when distractions are removed. As emperor, I was rarely alone in the physical sense. Every waking hour was filled with meetings, audiences, ceremonies, and obligations. But I learned to create solitude even in crowded rooms by developing an inner sanctuary that no external circumstance could penetrate. This skill became essential for maintaining peace under the constant pressures of imperial responsibility. The practice began out of necessity during the plague years, when the weight of so many deaths and the complexity of managing the crisis threatened to overwhelm me completely. I would escape to a small, private room in the palace, where I kept only the oil lamp, a simple chair, and my journal. In that space, by the steady light of the flame, I would retreat into myself to find the clarity and strength that constant external demands seemed to erode initially. These moments of solitude were uncomfortable. My mind, accustomed to constant stimulation and external focus, would race with worries about unfinished business, urgent decisions, and mounting responsibilities. I would feel guilty about taking time for myself when the empire needed my attention. But gradually, I discovered that these periods of inner retreat actually made me more effective in my external duties. Solitude taught me the difference between being alone with my thoughts and being alone with my deeper self. When I sat quietly with my racing mind, anxiety and stress dominated. But when I moved deeper, past the surface thoughts, to the quiet observer beneath them, I found a source of peace and wisdom that no external situation could disturb. In solitude, I learned to distinguish between the voice of my ego, concerned with reputation, success, and approval, and the voice of my deeper wisdom, concerned with virtue, truth, and right action. The ego's voice was loud, urgent, and anxiety-provoking. The wisdom voice was quiet, patient, and deeply peaceful. Solitude created the silence necessary to hear the quieter voice. I developed specific practices for deepening this inner retreat. The first was what I called ego observation, watching my thoughts and emotions without immediately identifying with them. Instead of thinking I am angry, I would notice anger is arising. Instead of I am worried, I would observe worry is present. This subtle shift created space between my essential self and my temporary mental states. The second practice was identity questioning, asking myself who I really was beneath all the roles and responsibilities. Strip away emperor, philosopher, father, Roman, what remains? In the deepest solitude, I discovered an essence that was independent of any external identity, a core self that could remain peaceful regardless of what happened to any of my roles. The third practice was silence cultivation, simply sitting in complete quiet, not trying to think or solve problems, but resting in pure awareness. These periods of silence, initially uncomfortable and seemingly unproductive, gradually became the most refreshing and clarifying parts of my day. Solitude also taught me the art of what I called selective engagement. Even when physically surrounded by people, I could choose which conversations to enter fully and which to handle from my centered, solitary space. I could be present to others without losing my connection to my inner sanctuary. This skill proved invaluable during difficult Senate sessions or tense military briefings. While appearing fully engaged with the external situation, part of my attention remained anchored in the peaceful solitude I had cultivated. This allowed me to respond wisely rather than reactively, even under intense pressure. The lamp taught me that solitude, like its light, doesn't depend on external conditions. Whether the room was crowded or empty, whether the day was peaceful or chaotic, the flame burned steadily. Similarly, the inner solitude I discovered could be accessed anywhere, anytime, regardless of circumstances. Perhaps the most profound discovery was that solitude is not selfish, but generous. When you find peace within yourself, you have peace to offer others. When you no longer depend on others for your emotional stability, you can be truly present to their needs rather than unconsciously asking them to meet yours. I noticed that after periods of deep solitude, I was more patient with difficult people, more creative in solving problems, and more compassionate in my judgments. The time spent alone was not time taken away from serving others, but time invested in becoming more capable of service. Solitude also revealed the futility of seeking validation from external sources. In the quiet of my inner retreat, I could feel directly whether my actions aligned with virtue, without needing others' approval to confirm it. This inner knowing became more reliable than any external feedback and provided a steady foundation for decision-making. The practice taught me that everyone needs regular solitude, not as escape from life, but as renewal for living. Just as the body needs rest to function optimally, the soul needs solitude to maintain its connection to deeper wisdom and peace. In a world that often equates being alone with being lonely, I discovered that solitude is actually the antidote to loneliness. When you're comfortable in your own company, you're never truly alone. When you've found the source of peace within yourself, you can share that peace with everyone you meet. The oil lamp burned brightest in the darkest hours, just as solitude provided the greatest strength during the most challenging times. In the depths of silence, I found not emptiness, but fullness, not isolation, but connection to the essential self that could weather any storm. Near the end of my life, I kept an ancient papyrus scroll on my desk containing the names of emperors who had ruled before me: Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, and others. Some had been revered, others reviled, but they all shared one quality: they were gone. Their monuments crumbled, their laws were changed, their very names would eventually be forgotten by most of humanity. This scroll taught me the most liberating truth about legacy and the final key to unshakable peace. Most people torment themselves trying to build lasting monuments to their existence, achieving fame, accumulating wealth, creating institutions that will bear their names forever. They believe that if they can just make a big enough impact, leave a clear enough mark, they will somehow defeat the impermanence that governs all existence. This desperate grasping for permanence is one of the greatest sources of human suffering. I had built an empire, led armies, written philosophical works, constructed buildings, established laws. If anyone should have been able to create a lasting legacy, it was an emperor at the height of Roman power. Yet, as I studied that scroll of forgotten names, I realized that even the mightiest achievements are temporary. What remains is not the external monument, but the internal transformation that creating it produced. This insight revolutionized my understanding of what makes life meaningful. The value of my reign was not whether future generations would remember my name or preserve my buildings, but whether ruling had made me more virtuous, more wise, more compassionate. The worth of my philosophical studies was not whether my writings would survive, but whether studying had transformed my character. The meaning of my relationships was not whether they would last forever, but whether they had taught me to love more deeply. I began to see impermanence not as the enemy of meaning, but as its source. If everything lasted forever, nothing would be precious. If no choices had consequences that ended, no decisions would matter. If relationships never faced the possibility of loss, we would never learn to cherish them fully. Impermanence creates urgency, preciousness, and the need for wisdom in how we spend our limited time. The scroll taught me to distinguish between two types of legacy: external legacy and character legacy. External legacy consists of the things you will leave behind in the world: buildings, institutions, children, works of art, accumulated wealth. Character legacy consists of the person you become through your choices, the virtues you develop, the wisdom you gain, the love you learn to express. External legacy is largely beyond your control. You cannot guarantee that your children will honor your values, that your institutions will survive political changes, that your works will be preserved, or that your name will be remembered. Even if these things persist for centuries, they will eventually fade. Character legacy, however, is entirely within your control and can never be taken away. This understanding freed me from the exhausting effort to control how history would judge me. Instead of worrying about my reputation with future generations, I could focus on being worthy of my own respect today. Instead of trying to force others to continue my work, I could concentrate on doing that work with integrity while I was able. Instead of seeking immortality through external achievements, I could find eternity in the timeless virtues I practiced each day. The most profound realization was that character legacy is the only legacy that truly matters, because it's the only one that affects your actual experience of life. Whether people remember your name has no impact on your daily peace or your moment-to-moment happiness, but whether you've developed patience, wisdom, courage, and compassion affects every single moment you're alive. I began to see every challenge as an opportunity to build character legacy. The difficult senator wasn't just an obstacle to my legislation, he was a chance to practice patience and understanding. The military crisis wasn't just a threat to the empire, it was an opportunity to demonstrate courage and wisdom under pressure. The personal loss wasn't just something to endure, it was an invitation to deepen compassion and acceptance. This shift in focus created remarkable peace. When you're trying to control external legacy, you're constantly anxious about outcomes you cannot guarantee. When you focus on character legacy, you're working with material you can actually shape. You cannot control whether your empire will last, but you can control whether you rule it with justice. You cannot control whether your philosophy will be remembered, but you can control whether you live according to its principles. The scroll also reminded me that true influence happens through character, not position. The emperors whose names were forgotten had possessed ultimate external power, but had failed to develop internal virtue. Meanwhile, teachers like Epictetus, who had been slaves, continued to influence people centuries later, because they had focused on character development rather than external achievement. This led me to a paradoxical discovery. the less you care about being remembered, the more likely you are to be remembered for the right reasons. When you focus on being worthy rather than being recognized, your authenticity itself becomes memorable. When you concentrate on serving rather than being celebrated, your service creates its own lasting impact. I realized that the fear of being forgotten is really the fear of not having mattered. But mattering is not about permanent recognition. It's about making good use of whatever time and influence you're given. A kind word to a suffering person matters, even if no one remembers who spoke it. A just decision matters even if history forgets the judge. A moment of courage matters even if no one witnesses it. The papyrus scroll taught me that true legacy lies not in what you leave behind, but in what you become along the way. The goal is not to be remembered forever, but to live fully now. The purpose is not to defeat impermanence, but to make peace with it while using your temporary time wisely. In accepting the impermanence of all external things, I found the permanence of virtue itself. Kindness may be forgotten, but it's never wasted. Wisdom may go unrecognized, but it's never meaningless. Courage may leave no monument, but it always matters. The virtues are eternal, not because they last forever in the world, but because they're always available in the present moment to anyone willing to practice them. The brass compass on my desk always pointed true north, regardless of which direction the ship of state was sailing or how turbulent the political winds became. Like that compass, the principles I've shared with you provide unchanging direction through any storm life may bring. Now let me show you how to begin your own journey toward unshakable peace, adapted for the challenges of your modern world. The path begins with a simple recognition, the same human nature that struggled with anxiety, anger, and disturbance in ancient Rome struggles with these same challenges today. The external circumstances have changed. Dramatically, you face different pressures, different technologies, different social structures, but the internal landscape of human emotion and the principles for navigating it remain constant. Start with what I call the circle of control practice. Each morning, before checking your phone or email, take 5 minutes to identify what lies within your control today and what lies beyond it. You cannot control your boss's mood, the economy's direction, other people's opinions, or unexpected setbacks. You can control your effort, your attitude, your responses, and your choices. When you begin each day with this clarity, you stop wasting energy on the uncontrollable and focus it where it can actually make a difference. Develop your own version of the morning reflection that served me so well. Begin each day by setting an intention based on virtue rather than outcome. Instead of, I want this presentation to go perfectly, try, I want to prepare thoroughly and speak authentically. Instead of, I want everyone to like me, try, I want to treat everyone with respect and kindness. This shift from outcome goals to character goals puts your peace back in your own hands. Practice the discipline of perception. Throughout your day, when something disturbs your peace, pause and ask, what actually happened here, separate from my interpretation? Your coworker's critical comment is just words spoken. Your interpretation that it was a personal attack creates the disturbance. The traffic jam is just cars moving slowly. Your judgment that it's a catastrophe creates the stress. Train yourself to catch these interpretations before they steal your peace. Build your own version of negative visualization by regularly imagining loss or setback, then returning to the present with gratitude. Spend a few minutes imagining losing your job, your health, or a important relationship. Then open your eyes and appreciate what you currently have. This practice builds resilience while deepening gratitude for present blessings. Create daily memento mori reminders adapted to your world. You might set a daily phone alarm with the message, this could be your last day, how will you spend it? or place a small object on your desk that reminds you of life's brevity. The goal is not morbidity, but clarity about what truly matters. When time is limited, establish boundaries between what I call response time and reaction time. When you receive disturbing news, whether a difficult email, a disappointing call, or an unexpected setback, give yourself a specified period, perhaps 1 hour, perhaps 1 day before responding. Use this time to process the emotion, consider your options, and choose a response based on wisdom rather than impulse. Practice virtue under pressure in small ways that prepare you for larger challenges. Choose patience in minor frustrations to build patience for major ones. Practice honesty in easy situations to strengthen integrity for difficult ones. Show courage in low-stakes moments to develop courage for high-stakes decisions. Character is built through thousands of small choices, not a few dramatic moments. Develop your own evening reflection practice. Before sleep, review the day and ask, where did I act according to my values? And where did I fall short? What did I learn about myself and others? How can I apply this learning tomorrow? Write these reflections down to track patterns and progress over time. Learn to find solitude even in busy environments. You can practice inner retreat during your commute, in waiting rooms, or even during meetings by maintaining part of your attention on your breath or on your deeper intentions. This skill allows you to access peace regardless of external circumstances. Address the unique challenges of your digital age by applying ancient principles to modern problems. Social media comparison is just a new form of the envy and status anxiety that disturbed people in my time. Information overload is simply a modern version of the mental scatteredness that Stoics have always worked to focus. Online criticism is the same personal attack that philosophers have always learned to meet with equanimity. Create your own version of the inner citadel by identifying which values and principles are non-negotiable for you. What kind of person do you want to be regardless of circumstances? What virtues will you practice whether others appreciate them or not? Build your daily decisions around these core commitments rather than around external expectations or pressures. Remember that this is a practice, not a perfection. I struggled with these principles for decades and still fell short regularly. The goal is not to become invulnerable to all disturbance, but to recover more quickly when you do become disturbed, to learn from each experience, and to gradually build the mental habits that support peace. Expect resistance from others when you begin living according to these principles. People may interpret your newfound peace as aloofness, your lack of reactivity as indifference, or your focus on virtue as self. This resistance is natural and actually provides excellent opportunities to practice patience and understanding. Find or create a community of people who share these values, whether through books, online groups, local philosophy meets, or even one trusted friend. Surround yourself with others who support your commitment to wisdom and virtue. The path is possible alone, but much easier with companions. Most importantly, start where you are with what you have. You don't need to retreat to a monastery or abandon your responsibilities to practice these principles. The workplace frustrations, family challenges, and daily pressures you face are perfect training grounds for developing unshakable peace. Every difficult person is a teacher, every setback an opportunity, every day a chance to choose virtue. Over convenience, the compass of virtue always points true north, but you must choose to follow its direction. The path toward unshakable peace is always available, but you must choose to walk it. The principles work, but only when they're practiced consistently and patiently over time. Begin today, begin now, and trust that each step forward strengthens your ability to maintain peace regardless of what storms may come. As I write these final words, The eternal flame burns steadily in my private chamber, its light unchanged by the approaching darkness of my own mortality. Soon I will join the countless souls who have walked this earth before me. But the flame of wisdom, the understanding that nothing external can disturb your peace unless you allow it, will burn on through anyone who chooses to kindle it in their own heart. Looking back over my life, I see clearly now that my greatest victory was not conquering Germanic tribes or preserving the empire through plague and crisis. My greatest triumph was the gradual transformation from an anxious young man, overwhelmed by responsibility and disturbed by every setback, to someone who could maintain inner peace regardless of external circumstances. This transformation didn't happen overnight or through a single moment of enlightenment. It occurred through thousands of small choices, choosing virtue over convenience, wisdom over impulse, acceptance over resistance. Each time I paused to separate facts from interpretations, each time I focused on what I could control rather than what I couldn't, each time I responded with patience instead of anger, I strengthened the inner citadel that became my refuge. The most profound lesson of my entire reign is this: you already possess everything you need for complete peace, not external peace that depends on circumstances beyond your control, but internal peace, which depends only on your understanding and your choices. The power to never let anything disturb your peace lies not in controlling the world around you, but in mastering the world within you. I want you to understand that the philosophy I've shared is not merely intellectual theory, but practical wisdom, tested in the crucible of real responsibility. These principles sustained me through the darkest periods of crisis, guided me through the most difficult decisions, and provided unshakable peace even when everything external seemed to be falling apart. The Stoic path is not about becoming emotionless or indifferent to the world around you. It's about developing the wisdom to distinguish between appropriate emotional responses and unnecessary suffering, between caring deeply and being attached to outcomes, between engaging fully with life and being disturbed by its inevitable changes. When you truly internalize these teachings, something remarkable happens. You discover that the peace you've been seeking externally was always available internally. You stop needing favorable circumstances to feel content, others' approval to feel worthy, or guaranteed outcomes to feel secure. Your happiness becomes based on your character rather than your circumstances. This doesn't mean that challenges cease to exist or that you stop caring about outcomes. It means that challenges become opportunities to practice virtue rather than threats to your peace. It means that you can care deeply about results while accepting gracefully whatever actually occurs. It means that your fundamental well-being becomes independent of the ups and downs that characterize every human life. I have seen the mightiest empires crumble, the wisest plans fail, the strongest people break under pressure. But I have also seen the power of a mind that remains centered in virtue, a heart that finds peace through acceptance, and a spirit that cannot be conquered by any external force. The flame beside me represents the eternal nature of this wisdom. My body will return to dust, my empire will eventually fall, my name may be forgotten, but the understanding that true peace comes from within will remain as long as human beings seek freedom from unnecessary suffering. You who live in ages yet to come will face challenges I cannot imagine, pressures unknown in my time, circumstances that would seem impossible to someone from ancient Rome. But you will also possess the same capacity for wisdom, the same potential for virtue, the same access to the inner citadel where no external force can penetrate. The secret to never letting anything disturb your peace is not in preventing disturbances. They are inevitable as long as you live in the world, but in developing a relationship with disturbance that preserves your essential tranquility. When you understand that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your circumstances, but the awareness that observes all these things. You find a place of peace that nothing can touch. Build this understanding slowly, patiently, through daily practice rather than seeking dramatic transformation. Trust the process even when progress seems slow. Remember that every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose wisdom over reactivity, virtue over convenience, peace over disturbance. Most importantly, remember that this path is not selfish but generous. When you find peace within yourself, you have peace to offer the world. When you no longer depend on others for your emotional stability, you can serve them more effectively. When your happiness doesn't depend on circumstances, you can face any challenge with the calm strength that inspires others to find their own courage. The eternal flame burns on, indifferent to the changes that surround it, sustained by its own inner nature rather than by external conditions. May you discover that same unchanging peace within yourself, that same steady light that no darkness can extinguish, that same unshakable center that transforms every challenge into an opportunity for wisdom. This is my final gift to you, the knowledge that the peace you seek is not somewhere else, waiting for the right circumstances, but here now, waiting for your recognition. The power to never let anything disturb your peace lives within you, as it has always lived, as it will always live, eternal as the flame that lights the way for all who choose to follow wisdom rather than fear, virtue rather than vice, peace rather than disturbance. Go now and kindle this flame in your own heart. Let it burn brightly through whatever storms may come. And know that in doing so, you join an unbroken chain of seekers who have discovered that true freedom, true strength, and true peace can never be taken away because they arise not from what you have, but from who you choose to be. The flame is eternal. The peace is yours. The choice is now.